Let's bring in our panel. We'll discuss it. Joining us this morning, Afghanistan and Iraq veteran, retired Master Sergeant Scott Neal, Skyping in from Tampa, and via telephone, Middle East expert and author of The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Mideast and Catastrophes to Avoid, Dr. Walid Phares. Gentlemen, we thank you both for your time, and we're interested in your perspective. Scott, you're front and center. Let's start with you. What do you think the president will announce in terms of long-range strategy Wednesday from the White House?
I think what you'll see is what we've already been getting in small dribbles and drapes. You know, a persistent presence in Iraq, advisors on the ground, small numbers of special operators, raids like the one we've mentioned earlier on the show into Syria, an air campaign. But what I'm interested in is his, domestic terrorism and foreign fighter strategy as well.
Well, as we take a look at that, let's turn to Walid. The president has repeatedly said there will be no significant U.S. ground operation in Iraq or Syria. Instead, the president insists the Free Syrian Army will provide the presence on the ground. Do you believe, Walid, the FSA is strong enough to defeat ISIS within the boundaries of what used to be Syria?
We had that deja vu before when the FSA rose against the Assad regime, and we had discussions in Congress, and when the issue of the chemical weapons came up. We need to see the leaders of the FSA, and I have been for a couple of years now calling on the administration to bring them to Washington. If they have a goal, if they have people with whom we're going to be partnering, we need to see them here. We saw the leaders of the Northern Alliance before we did the invasion of Afghanistan. We sort of saw some of the Iraqi opposition. We know who the Kurds were before the invasion or the battle of Iraq in 2003. What we don't see now is when the administration tells us we're going to look at the moderate. Trust me, we know where the moderates are. There is no more trust in the issue of the moderate. We need to know who is the jihadist and who's the secular, who's the moderate. And once we have that clear picture, then yes, obviously, I believe that a strong, trained, armed, strategically supported Syrian opposition, or for that matter, inside Iraq, inside the Sunni area, the old Sahwa, the old awakening, reorganized, this could be a solution. But I want to see the leaders. I want to make sure that their ideology is not jihadist.
So, in other words, the president needs to call out and even perhaps bring to Washington representatives of these different groups in the Arab world to show they're the real thing, the responsible parties willing to step up against ISIS. I'm curious as well, Walid, in so doing, would the president help to put away what might become stereotypes that ISIS as an entity may be creating that may be problematic for other countries in the Arab world?
Let me go back one inch, Congressman, and say the reason why I am insisting that Congress needs, the American public needs, and parts of the administration need to see those leaders, because the experience of the administration throughout the Arab Spring has not been very convincing. They spoke of aiding the rebels in Libya, and we saw what the rebels have become, jihadists controlling Tripoli. Aiding other rebels in Syria, and we saw that some of them became al-Nusra, others became ISIS. Standing with the Muslim Brotherhood, and we saw what happened in Egypt. So the insistence of us as Americans knowing who these leaders are is important, and that's what the administration needs to do. Yes, on the other hand, many Arab countries are now very nervous. Saudis are nervous, the Jordanians, the UAE, other countries are nervous about the spread of ISIS to them. Not immediately. ISIS' priority now is to consolidate in Iraq and Syria, but then these countries know. Therefore, there is a window of opportunity for the president to work with a strong coalition of Arab moderates to push against ISIS as well.
Scott, the administration is saying to different reporters that this anticipated expansion of military efforts in Iraq and quite possibly Syria would amount to a counter-terror operation comparable to what was done in hunting down Osama bin Laden. Does it match up that way in your mind?
It does, and it has to. And what we have to, be conscious of is a bit of mission creep. There in the early days of the Afghan war, there were only 230 special operators and their service and support personnel, enabling them. And then we got into Anaconda and we invited more conventional forces and regiments, and this thing really grew big. So if there's a determination to stay with special operations, then I think we'll have the right amount of forces and capability to be successful.
Walid, last week, our president met with our NATO allies in Wales, and he talked about creating a new coalition to fight ISIS, which brings to mind coalitions past a decade ago. In rebuilding yet another coalition, what do you think what do you think the NATO allies will bring in to actually go after ISIS? Are we going to see widespread acceptance of our president's invitation?
I think that NATO allies, after what they saw over the past 2 to 3 years, especially the Syrian situation last year, they are waiting to see American leadership, not just in Europe, because they would follow if they see a good plan, but also in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, what we have right now is the formation of a moderate Sunni alliance, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, and others perhaps. Now, the architecture that President Obama needs to be working on is to work with this already existing funded alliance of Arab moderates, link it to the NATO partners, and make sure that there will be no mission creep towards Iraq, towards Iran, allowing the Iranians to do some stuff in Iraq, and there will be an Iranian mission creep, and making sure that Assad is contained while we are fighting against ISIS.
Both of you have mentioned mission creep. Let's take a look at our parent website. There's a headline at Newsmax.com reading, Obama seeks $5 billion to fight Islamic State. Scott, in your mind, are we going to see that as just an initial figure, and you have fears of mission creep? Are we going to see more and more spending to deal with this problem of ISIS?
I believe so, in several fronts. One, just in military hardware, the fuel burned, the bombs dropped, which are several thousands of dollars a piece. This really is just a low number to get approval and then start expanding it from there. And what will be interesting is some of the financial contributions of some of these states that aren't willing to participate militarily.
Walid, Scott mentions it, and we think back to the first Gulf War. George H.W. Bush got literally a buy-in from the free world to kick Saddam Hussein and Iraq out of Kuwait. Do you believe allies and moderate Arab nations are not only going to put up men and machinery, but also money in this endeavor?
Congressman, yes. Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, and others, those who have the cash, will put money. But again, this time it's going to be under condition. They want to make sure that the U.S. is in it to the end, that there will be no Taliban kind of negotiations in the middle of it, and that Iran is not going to have the upper hand in Iraq. If those conditions are met, I think that these moderate countries, including Egypt, will put, if not money, will put soldiers on the ground. Yes, they will do it. It all depends on how the direction of Washington is going to be.
A minute and a half remains, gentlemen. Let's talk about another troubled region, the Ukraine, and the conduct of Russia and the Russia Federation. Scott, Russian military jets made provocative flyovers on a Canadian frigate taking part in a naval exercise in the Black Sea. What is this? Putin's machismo on display, or what's going on there?
Really, it's just, he's been very unimpeded in his actions, and he elevates it just like a frog in boiling water. He just continues to turn up the heat. He gets no pushback or pressure. He sees us as distracted in another region altogether. So really, you're going to see bolder and bolder actions coming out of him.
Walid, last word to you, 30 seconds on what you're seeing going on with Russia.
As long as NATO is not deploying divisions along the lines of these countries in Europe, as long as it is one frigate by Canada, one destroyer by the United States, you're going to see a lot of these sorties. To talk to the Russian leadership, you need to have on the ground deployed much larger forces. Then you establish imbalance of power.
Gentlemen, we thank you very much. Scott Neal Skyping in from Tampa with his background in Special Forces, and Walid Phares, the author of the book, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Mideast and Catastrophes to Avoid. Gentlemen, we thank you very much. Now, we don't avoid, we welcome your comments. Why don't you tweet them to me at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.